Ranger Mike Randall was no stranger to lonely mornings. Out in the Pinewood Lake region, where he'd been posted for 4 years, solitude was the norm. On most days, he welcomed it. The crisp air, the towering pines rustling overhead, and the silent presence of wildlife made him feel connected to something larger than himself. But this morning was different. A thick fog hung like a veil across Pinewood Lake. From the ranger station's front porch, Mike could only see a few yards before the world dissolved into a pale, shifting mass. Even the water's surface, normally a glittering mirror, lay hidden beneath a blanket of grey. He checked the temperature, a biting 40 degrees, unseasonably cold for autumn. He zipped up his jacket, grabbed a thermos of hot coffee, and set off on foot to do his usual morning patrol around the lake's perimeter. The path was well worn, lined with pine needles. The fog lent every pine trunk and boulder an eerie half-presence, looming suddenly out of the haze like ghosts. As he rounded a bend near the north shore, Mike halted. Through the swirling mist he saw a silhouette standing at the water's edge, a lone figure, motionless, facing the lake. The posture was odd. Arms at their sides, head inclined as though listening to something. No one else was supposed to be here at this hour, and no cars had been parked near the usual trailheads. The local fishermen typically arrived midday, especially on a weekday. His first thought, is someone in distress? He approached carefully, calling out, "Hello? Are you okay?" The words seemed to vanish in the fog. The figure did not move, did not answer. Mike quickened his pace, each footstep crunching the gravel by the water's edge. The figure remained still as a statue. He was perhaps 20 yards away when the shape dissolved. One moment it was there, the next it faded into the swirling mist. At first he thought they had stepped back or run off, but he couldn't hear any motion. The hush of the fog-laden morning remained undisturbed. Heart thumping, Mike reached the spot where the stranger had stood. Nothing. Just wet gravel lapped by the lake's calm tide. Confused, he glanced at the ground, searching for footprints, but the moist sand revealed only vague impressions that could have been natural depressions. The air smelled of pine and dampness. No other clue lingered. "Hello?" He tried again, spinning in a slow circle, scanning the fog. Nothing. The white wall of haze swallowed everything beyond a few steps. Feeling vaguely unsettled, he pulled his radio from his belt and reported into the station's main frequency, although he knew his partner, Ranger Ellis, wouldn't arrive until later. "This is Ranger Randall checking in. I saw someone out by the north shore. They seemed to vanish. Probably just a local out for a walk." Over. No immediate reply, just the crackle of static. He sighed. Radios often acted up in the thick fog. He resolved to continue his patrol, hoping the figure was indeed just a morning walker. But a prickle of unease stayed with him. A single silhouette, standing so still, then disappearing without a trace. There was something off about it. Shrugging it off for the moment, he resumed his route. As the morning wore on, the sun rose higher, but the fog remained stubbornly intact. By the time Mike circled back to the ranger station near midday, the mist had only thinned marginally. From the station's windows he could usually see across the lake. Today, the view extended no more than 50 feet before fading to white. Inside, the station was warm, heated by an old wood-burning stove. He refilled his coffee mug and sat at the small desk to file a routine morning patrol report. He couldn't shake the image of that silent figure. Something about it set his nerves on edge. The memory of how it vanished like a mirage or smoke kept replaying in his mind. Ranger Ellis arrived around noon in the park's one shared pickup truck, water droplets shining on the hood. "Hey, Mike," Ellis called, stepping inside and stomping off his boots. "Fog's a real beast today." "You can say that again," Mike muttered. "I saw somebody on the shore earlier. They just disappeared." Ellis frowned. "You talked to them?" "Didn't get the chance. 1 second they were there, the next gone. I looked around but didn't find them." Ellis offered a half smile. "These old-timers around here love to go out for random walks, especially if they're insomniacs. I've startled quite a few seniors who like the quiet of early mornings." Mike nodded. That was plausible. Still, it hadn't felt like a simple vanishing into the fog. It felt unnatural. He decided not to press the point. They ate lunch together, discussing usual park matters, an upcoming scout troop visit, a scheduled dredging of one of the smaller streams, and the routine fish population survey. By mid-afternoon, Ellis left on errands. Mike grabbed his gear for a second patrol. The fog had begun receding. Visibility was better, maybe 100 feet. He half expected to find some clue about that morning's encounter. Yet, as he walked the shoreline, he saw nothing unusual. The faint rustle of wind came and went, stirring the pines. He spotted a heron perched on a submerged log, unbothered by the conditions. Hours drifted by quietly. By the time he returned to the station, the day was nearing its end, a dull glow in the west indicating the hidden sunset. It was only then, trudging up the slope to the station's front door, that Mike noticed a strange set of footprints. They wound across the muddy ground near the station's side wall, size and shape matching his own boots. His mind did a double take. He hadn't walked there today, yet the prints were fresh, leading around the building and down the slope toward the water's edge. He followed them, flashlight in hand. The footprints indeed seemed identical to his, same unique tread pattern. They led down to a narrow stretch of shoreline. Then they simply stopped, no scuff marks, no backtrack. It looked as though the owner of those footsteps had walked straight into the lake. A chill prickled the back of Mike's neck. He turned slowly, sweeping his flashlight across the mist-laden water. The beam illuminated rolling fog and little else. Had someone stolen his boots? That made no sense. His spare boots were still in his locker. Or had the figure from this morning left them as some bizarre message? The notion felt absurd, but so did the entire situation. The hairs on his arms stood up as he realized the footprints leading away from the station implied someone or something had been right by his station door, wearing footprints that matched his own. He exhaled a shaky breath, fighting a ripple of panic. After scanning the shore one last time, he retreated inside, locking the door behind him. Night fell swiftly. Ranger Ellis had clocked out and driven home. The station was quiet, save for the wood stove's crackle and the distant hum of the generator. Mike busied himself with a stack of paperwork, though his attention kept drifting to the windows, seeking movement in the fog. Outside, the moon was hidden behind thick cloud cover. The only light came from the station's porch bulb and a couple of floodlights that cast fuzzy halos in the mist. Around 8 o'clock, Mike heated a can of soup on the stove. He tried to focus on tomorrow's tasks, but his nerves were wound tight. He nearly dropped his spoon when something dark flickered outside the window. A silhouette. Heart-pounding, he rose and pressed his face to the glass. The figure stood just beyond the ring of light, partially obscured by swirling fog. But it was definitely there, a tall shape, posture stiff, arms at its sides, head tilted. Adrenaline surged. Mike yanked the station door open, stepping onto the porch. "Hey!" he called, voice echoing. The figure didn't move. He grabbed his flashlight, aimed it, but the beam only revealed shifting fog. The silhouette seemed a step out of reach, forever blurred by the mist. He descended the porch steps quickly. "If you need help, talk to me." Each footstep splashed in the damp soil. The shape receded in silence, melding into the swirl of white. After a few more steps, Mike realized he was chasing empty air. It was gone again. His breath billowed in the cold night. He scanned the gloom, hand tense on the flashlight. The only response was the faint lap of water against the shore. Shoulders slumping, he returned to the station, locking the door with trembling fingers. He stood by the window, peering out. The figure had reappeared at the edge of the clearing. He almost missed it, motionless in the distance. Then it slowly raised an arm, beckoning. Mike felt the blood drain from his face. The gesture was painfully deliberate, a silent command to come closer. He backed away from the window, fear clawing at his insides. "What do you want?" he whispered to the empty room. The shape outside did not speak. After a minute of tense watching, it vanished as though never there. That night, sleep came grudgingly. Mike lay in the station's small bunk, every nerve alert, expecting to hear knocking at the door or scraping at the windows. But the only sound was the distant wind, rustling pines in a hollow murmur. The next morning, he confided in Ranger Ellis. He relayed the footprints, the figure in the window, everything. Ellis listened with eyes widening. "That's disconcerting," he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "You sure you're not just spooked by the fog and all?" Mike shrugged, frustration lacing his tone. "I've done dozens of patrols in conditions like these. This is different. I'm not imagining footprints that vanish into the lake, Ellis." Ellis frowned. "All right, I believe you. We can ask around. Some of the old folks in town might know if there's a story about weird sightings around Pinewood Lake." They hopped into the park's truck and drove into the nearest settlement, a small lumber town called Barrow Glen. The main street boasted a diner, a general store, and a run-down library. While Ellis checked with the local sheriff's office about any missing persons, Mike visited the library, hoping to find old records or local law. He browsed dusty shelves, eventually stumbling on a binder of newspaper clippings about Pinewood Lake. Most were about routine things: fishing contests, expansions to the ranger station decades ago, the occasional disappearance that ended up being a false alarm. But one article from 1982 caught his eye. "Local swimmer mysteriously disappears," read the headline. The short article told of a man, Henry Calloway, who went for a morning swim in dense fog and never returned. Witnesses claimed to have seen him walking toward the water's edge, and then no further evidence was found. No body, no footprints, no sign of drowning. The official verdict was that he likely got lost in the fog and drowned, though divers never recovered a corpse. Mike's skin prickled. The article included a blurred black and white photo of Henry, standing tall, arms at his sides near the lake. He wore a stoic expression. The resemblance to the silhouette was unnerving. More clippings detailed other vanishings, though few garnered much press. A fisherman disappeared in 1967, also on a foggy day. A teenage girl in 1955 was said to have walked away from her campsite into the mist, never to be seen again. Altogether, it painted a strange pattern. Pinewood Lake had a quiet but persistent history of unexplained losses when the fog was thick. Shaken, Mike took notes, then reunited with Ellis, who reported that the sheriff had no recent missing persons bulletins. On the drive back, Mike explained his findings. Ellis grew pale. "That's spooky, to say the least." They arrived at the station in the late afternoon. The sky was leaden, threat of more fog. Mike parked the truck and sighed. "I have a bad feeling about this." Ellis patted his shoulder. "We'll keep watch tonight. Maybe if the figure shows up again, we can confront him together." Mike nodded, grateful he wouldn't be alone. That evening, the two rangers prepared for a long stakeout inside the station. They brewed a pot of strong coffee, set up chairs by the biggest window overlooking the lake, and kept the porch light on. The fog thickened outside as though on cue. The watery shimmer of the lake disappeared behind the swirling gloom. Hours stretched. Midnight approached. The men spoke in hushed voices, mostly about old mysteries in the park, the possibility of illusions caused by moisture in the air, or maybe a trick of the mind. But both knew the footprints and vanishings had no easy explanation. Shortly after midnight, Ellis jerked upright, nearly spilling his coffee. "Mike, look," he pointed. Sure enough, a silhouette had emerged from the swirling grey. It stood about 30 feet from the porch, unmoving. Mike's pulse thundered. This figure looked exactly as he'd seen before. Tall, arms down, head tilted. A moment later, it lifted a hand in that beckoning gesture. No face was visible, just darkness and fog. Ellis swore under his breath. "What in God's name?" Before Mike could answer, the figure glided sideways, as if shifting behind a curtain of mist. The rangers jumped to their feet, unbolting the door. They stepped out onto the porch, flashlights sweeping across the clearing. The shape was gone. They circled around the station, scouring the perimeter. Near the back corner of the building, Ellis let out a sharp gasp. "Mike, look." Footprints in the soft soil large, matching Mike's boots again. They curved around, heading toward the lake. The rangers followed them warily. Soon they reached the water's edge, where the footprints vanished. Ellis exhaled shakily, shining his light on the gentle waves. "This is impossible. Footprints in your tread pattern. But you were inside with me the whole night." Mike stared, a knot of dread forming in his stomach. He crouched, studying the final print. Water lapped at the edges, erasing any chance to see what happened next. "It's trying to lure us," he said, voice hoarse. "Or to copy me somehow." Ellis placed a hand on Mike's shoulder. "We won't let it. Come on, let's head back in. Nothing good will come from wading into that water at 1 a.m. They retreated inside, hearts pounding. Neither suggested sleeping. They merely sat in tense silence until dawn began to break, each lost in his own apprehension about the forces at work around Pinewood Lake. As the murky light of morning came, the fog receded slightly, revealing the lake's shoreline. Mike and Ellis decided to do a thorough daytime search, hoping to find any rational clue, a hidden culprit, footprints that didn't vanish, anything. They trudged along the shore, each armed with a radio and a camera. Hours passed. The dense pine forest loomed on their left, the lake's surface on their right, still half shrouded in haze. The occasional loon call broke the quiet, but no sign of the mysterious figure. They eventually reached the northern inlet where a small pier jutted out into the lake. As they approached, Mike noticed something bobbing in the shallow water. A piece of clothing, dull greenish fabric. On closer inspection, they realized it was a tattered ranger jacket, partially snagged on a submerged branch. Ellis pulled it free carefully, the smell of stagnant water wafting up. The jacket bore an old, faded Park Service patch. No name tag remained. Mike's heart sank. Could this belong to some long-lost ranger? "Look at the style," Ellis murmured, turning it over. "This patch design is old, from the 70s or 80s. Could have belonged to a ranger on duty back then, or maybe it's just random equipment that got lost." Mike said nothing, staring at the dripping garment. He recalled the 1982 article about Henry Calloway. Was he a ranger or a local? The article said he was a local man, not a ranger. But more vanishings had been rumored. Could one have been a fellow ranger? Stowing the jacket in a plastic bag, they scanned the shallows further, but found no additional remains, no bones, no gear, nothing to identify. The water's clarity remained poor due to the swirling silt. The rangers could only guess at how many hidden secrets might lie below. They finished their circuit in a somber mood, returning to the station as the afternoon wore on. A sense of gloom settled over them. The spectre at the lake's edge, the footprints, the decades of vanishings, everything pointed to a haunting or presence beyond normal explanation. And now an old ranger's jacket had surfaced like a macabre sign. Days dragged on in a slow parade. Each morning, thick fog blanketed Pinewood Lake. Each night, the figure appeared in the distance, beckoning. If Mike and Ellis ventured out, it disappeared, leaving behind footprints matching Mike's. On 2 occasions, Ellis swore he saw footprints in his tread pattern. That realization deepened the sense of dread. Whatever force lurked here was mimicking them both. The men took turns sleeping in short shifts, never fully resting. The station's windows became watch points. The swirling haze outside seemed alive with subtle motion, drifting shapes that might or might not be illusions. More than once, Mike woke from fitful dreams convinced he heard footsteps on the porch, only to find no one. One late evening, Ellis snapped, pacing the small main room. "We have to do something," he said. "We can't just wait for the next show." Mike slumped in a chair. Dark circles under his eyes spoke of exhaustion. "I don't know what. We've called the sheriff's office. They brushed it off as either elaborate pranks or illusions. The state park authority can't send a team unless there's a tangible emergency or missing persons case. And we can't exactly say ghost footprints are scaring us." Ellis breathed heavily, leaning on the desk. "What if this presence is tied to the lake itself? Some local haunting, some legend we haven't uncovered?" Mike grimaced. "I've scoured all the old articles. There's mention of strange disappearances, but no direct cause. The only thread is the fog, and people vanishing near the water's edge. They sat in grim silence. Outside, the wind moaned across the pines. Mike stared at the thin files they had, the newspaper clippings, the battered ranger jacket in a bag. A single question occupied his thoughts. How do we stop something that isn't human, that simply appears in the fog? A turning point came 2 nights later. A particularly heavy fog enveloped the lake, thicker than any yet. It was past midnight, and Mike was alone in the station. Ellis had driven to town for supplies and was late returning. The building felt suffocatingly quiet. Mike paced, glancing at the clock. He went to the window, peering out. Through the grey swirl, he made out a dark shape near the water. The figure, with a jolt of dread, he noticed it was closer than usual, perhaps a mere 20 feet from the porch. He could almost make out the outline of shoulders, a head, the silhouette of an arm lifting in that same beckoning motion. He forced himself to stay calm. "I won't go out." Yet, as he watched, the shape began to move, drifting sideways closer to the path leading around the station. Fear twisted his gut. Was it approaching the door? Suddenly, his phone buzzed, a message from Ellis. "Got a flat tire. Gonna be late. Don't do anything dumb." The note provided a momentary distraction. When Mike looked back at the window, he froze. The figure was gone. But the front porch light flickered, indicating movement near the door. Knock, knock. The sound was faint but unmistakable. Mike's heart nearly burst from his ribcage. He stepped back, eyes locked on the door. The knocks came again, steady, measured. Gathering courage, he grabbed his flashlight and yanked the door open. No one stood there. Fog curled into the station's entrance, swirling around his ankles. He raised the flashlight, sweeping the porch. Nothing. Yet. Footprints glistened on the wooden planks. Wet footprints shaped exactly like his boots. A whispery voice, impossible to pinpoint direction, seemed to sigh his name. "Meek!" He staggered back, breath ragged. The footprints led off the porch, down the slope toward the lake. The darkness beyond was impenetrable. "It wants me to follow." The idea sent a chill through his bones. He slammed the door shut, locked it, and slid a heavy metal bar across for good measure. Then he sank to the floor, trembling. The faint whisper came again, muffled by the walls drifting in from all sides. It was like the entire fog had found a voice. Hours later, Ellis returned to find Mike still huddled by the door. His expression must have spoken volumes because Ellis didn't ask for an explanation. He just set a hand on Mike's shoulder. "Come on, buddy, let's get you up. You're safe." But was he? By the next morning, Mike had calmed slightly, though calm was relative. Ellis proposed they do something drastic, wait for the figure to appear, then chase it, come what may. Let the sheriff call them crazy, but they needed answers. Night fell in hush, with the thick fog swirling as always. Both rangers prepared, headlamps, flashlights, even a handheld thermal imaging device the park used for wildlife surveys. If the figure showed any heat signature, they'd detect it. Sure enough, around 11 p.m., they spotted a dark shape by the water. Silently, they crept out the back door, circling to approach from behind. The wet grass muffled their steps. Mike's heart hammered. Ellis gave a nod. They switched on the thermal device. The display showed the lake as a cool swath of blues and greens. The figure was a void, an outline with no heat at all. Pure black on the scale. "Impossible," Ellis whispered. They advanced, flashlights off, relying on moonlight and the faint station floodlights behind them. The shape stood at the lake's edge, apparently oblivious. Then, as they drew within 10 feet, it turned. Mike's breath caught. He could see, through the haze, the hint of a face, except the features were blurred, as though half-formed, eyes sunken shadows, mouth a faint line. It lifted an arm, pointing directly at Mike. A single step closer, and the shape shimmered, like ripples in water. Then it retreated, gliding across the shoreline. Ellis bolted after it, shouting, "Stop!" Mike followed, adrenaline surging. The chase led them along the bank, weaving around driftwood and stones. The figure never ran, it moved in an eerie, floating manner, always just out of reach. Then it angled inland, heading into a cluster of tall pines. They scrambled through the trees, needles scraping their arms. For a moment they lost sight of it among the trunks. Then Ellis spotted it ahead, standing behind a wide pine. He lunged around the tree, flashlight raised. "You're not going anywhere." He stopped short. The area behind the pine was empty, except for a swirl of fog. No footsteps, no sign of the figure. Mike joined him, panting, shining his beam in every direction. Nothing. Ellis let out a shaky breath. That was definitely not human. "Did you see that face, like it was half made of smoke?" Mike nodded, pulses pounding in his ears. "And it's wearing, or imitating, my boots. Maybe yours too." A wave of nausea hit him. "We can't trap it if it vanishes at will." They walked back to the station in a daze of confusion and dread. The entity had lured them out, teased them with a chase, then disappeared. They'd learned nothing except that they were dealing with something beyond standard logic. The next few days brought no relief. The phenomenon repeated nightly. The silhouette, the footprints, the beckoning. Fog refused to leave. The local forecast predicted continuing cold fronts, which meant more mist. They were trapped in a cycle of anxiety. Finally, Ellis suggested a last resort. "Let's talk to Lydia Proctor." Lydia was an elderly woman who lived alone near the southern edge of the lake. Locals called her superstitious. She was rumored to have knowledge of old folk tales and legends. Perhaps she had some insight. So one afternoon they drove to her rustic cabin. She answered the door wearing a crocheted shawl, her face lined with age and weariness. "Rangers," she greeted flatly. "Why are you on my porch?" Mike cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we have some questions about Pinewood Lake. Strange occurrences, vanishings, a figure in the fog." Before he finished, Lydia held up a hand, eyes narrowing. "The man in the fog," she said quietly. "I've heard rumors for decades. My mother told me of a spirit that lingers by the lake, collecting souls." Ellis exchanged a glance with Mike. "Collecting souls? That's intense." Lydia sighed, waving them inside. They followed her into a cluttered living room that smelled of dried herbs. "Legends say the lake has a guardian, or a cursed spirit that appears in heavy fog. It tries to lure people into the water where they vanish. Once it claims them, they become part of the fog, echoes that roam the shoreline." Mike felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "We found references to old disappearances. Are you saying this entity is responsible?" "I believe so." Lydia's voice was calm, as though discussing the weather. "Some say it's the restless ghost of a drowned traveler from long ago. Others say it's older than any human tragedy. It mimics footsteps, faces, voices. It calls you with your own reflection, or the illusions of your footprints, so you follow it to the water's edge. Once you step in, you're lost forever. You're lost." Ellis rubbed his temples. "How do we stop it?" The old woman offered a sad shrug. "I don't know. The stories never mention a sure way to break its hold. Some folks say if you resist long enough, the fog will clear and it moves on. But that might just be talk. If it's chosen you, it's said it can follow you even away from the lake." A grim silence filled the small cabin. Outside, a new wave of fog rolled across the pines. Mike felt a deep, instinctual fear, like the lake had indeed chosen him or them for some unknown reason. They thanked Lydia and left, more unsettled than before. On the drive back, neither ranger spoke. The notion of a malevolent force, unstoppable and ancient, weighed heavily. That night, the station's lights flickered amidst swirling mist. Mike felt an odd calm settle over him, akin to resignation. He'd run out of rational strategies. The only remaining approach, insane as it seemed, was to confront the entity on its terms. He told Ellis he was going to the lake's edge alone. Ellis objected, but Mike insisted. "I'm tired of being haunted night after night. I'll go down there, see what it wants. If something goes wrong, radio for backup." Ellis grimaced but nodded. I'll watch from the station with the floodlight. He clasped Mike's shoulder. Be careful, please. Mike mustered a shaky smile. You too. Stepping outside, he found the fog thicker than ever, like a living wall around the station. He walked slowly down the slope toward the shoreline, each footstep splashing on damp earth. The light from the station glowed behind him, a weak orb in the haze. He heard the water's quiet lapping, and then from the gloom, the figure emerged. It stood less than 10 yards away, silhouette shifting in the swirling fog. Mike swallowed hard, taking a few cautious steps forward. The shape lifted an arm, beckoning as always, then turned toward the lake. Mike followed, drawn by a compulsion he couldn't fully explain. His body trembled, but he felt compelled to keep going. The water's edge appeared, a faint reflection of the station's distant light dancing on ripples. The figure glided forward, stepping onto the watery shoreline without a sound. Its form shimmered, half submerged in mist and water. Mike stopped, boots inches from the lake. He could sense a presence wrapping around his mind, an insistent pull. He heard a chorus of faint voices, maybe the voices of those who had disappeared. Why? He croaked, barely able to speak. Why do you want me? The figure paused, head turning slowly. For a heartbeat, the fog parted around its face. Mike saw hollow eyes, black as the deepest water, and a mouth that gaped soundlessly. The eyes locked onto his. A wave of dizziness swept through him, like hands grasping his soul, tugging it forward. He teetered at the shore, foot almost sliding into the water. No. With monumental effort, he wrenched himself back. The figure's head tilted, as if in surprise or annoyance. It beckoned again, more forcefully, stepping deeper into the lake. Mike felt the pull intensify. If he took one more step, suddenly a blinding glare swept over them. Ellis had aimed the station's floodlight directly at the shore. The beam cut through the fog, illuminating Mike and the entity. The shape let out a silent shudder, retreating further into the water to evade the light. The spell broke. Mike staggered backward, breath ripping from his lungs. He retreated up the slope, heart in his throat. The figure remained in the lake, a dark outline glaring from the water's surface. Then the fog closed in, swallowing it once more. Collapsing onto the porch, Mike gasped, "Thank you," to Ellis, who ran over and helped him inside. After a moment to gather himself, Mike told him what happened. It almost had me in the water, but that spotlight gave me enough time to pull free. Ellis nodded, clearly shaken. We can't keep doing this. We might not win next time, but fate or nature had a final twist in store. Overnight, a powerful windstorm blew in from the north. Trees groaned. The station's windows rattled. The relentless fog that had plagued them for weeks was shredded by the gale. When dawn broke, the sun rose on a clear, crisp lake. The water sparkled under bright light. No haze to be seen. Mike and Ellis stepped outside in awe. The difference was shocking. For the first time in ages, Pinewood Lake looked peaceful, almost benign. They cautiously went down to the shore. No footprints, no sign of the figure. The wind carried fresh air, stirring the pines to a gentle hush. As the days passed, no new appearances occurred. The nighttime visitor didn't show. The ominous footprints matching their boots never reappeared. The gloom that hung over the station lifted, replaced by normal autumn rhythms. Migrating birds, the occasional fisherman, chilly mornings that gave way to crisp afternoons. And yet, Mike couldn't fully relax. He recalled Lydia's words, "If it's chosen you, it can follow you." Was the entity merely dormant, waiting for the next stretch of fog? He kept a watchful eye every morning, checking the shoreline. But for now, Pinewood Lake showed no trace of the eerie presence. 3 weeks later, the season shifted toward winter. Nighttime temperatures dipped below freezing, dusting the pine needles with frost. The fog did not return with its previous vigor. Ranger Ellis arranged a meeting with the State Park Authority, handing over an understated report about unusual conditions and the potential need for greater safety precautions in heavy fog. Mike, haunted by the memory of that inhuman face, struggled with nightmares. Most nights, he relived the moment he almost stepped into the lake. In his dreams, the figure stood over him, hollow eyes fixated, beckoning him into black water. He considered requesting a transfer, yet some stubborn part of him refused, convinced that leaving might not end the haunting. Perhaps it would only follow him, or choose another victim in this lonely park. He decided to stay vigilant, to watch over the lake. If it came back, he'd be ready. On a bitterly cold morning, well after sunrise, a delicate haze drifted across the lake's surface. Mike stepped out on the station porch, breath hanging in the air, scanning for any shapes in the distance. For a moment, his pulse skipped. He saw a flicker of movement. He raised his binoculars. A drift of fog parted, revealing nothing but water ripples. He lowered the binoculars slowly, releasing a tense breath. Maybe it's gone forever, he allowed himself to hope. But as he turned to go back inside, he thought he heard his name in the faint breeze. Miek. He froze, heart pounding, gaze darting across the silent shore. Only the rustle of pines and the faint shimmer of watery mist greeted him. No figure, no footprints, no swirling silhouette. After a long minute, he exhaled shakily and returned inside. To this day, Ranger Mike remains at Pinewood Lake watchful. Locals whisper that on certain foggy dawns he can be seen standing at the shore's edge, scanning the water. They say he's looking for something, or maybe someone, because the stories about vanishings have never really stopped. The lake has claimed people before, and likely will again, especially on those mornings when the fog is so thick that even your own footprints disappear as soon as you turn around. Sometimes, in the hush of dawn, you might see him looking out over the water, tense and silent. And if the wind shifts just right, you might hear him speaking under his breath, warning whoever might listen. Watch the fog. If you see a figure by the lake, turn away. Don't follow him. Don't let him lead you to the water's edge, because if you do, you may find your footprints are not your own, and that they stop exactly where the dark water begins. Because once the man in the fog beckons you, it's already too late.